So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. My name is Rajat Sadana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Along with me, I have a whole team that's supporting me in this webinar. We have Harsha, who's a principal GMAT expert, and he's going to be your co-host today. And we have Sandeep, who's a principal strategy expert, and he's going to be your co-host today as well. Again, both of them would respond to different kind of questions during this webinar. My goal in this webinar is to introduce the method that e-GMAT pane, the method of pre-thinking assumptions, and to tell you how it helps you answer some of the most challenging questions in the required time, which is about 2 minutes or so. And because the goal is to demonstrate this method to you, we will be solving some really challenging questions in this webinar. Now, to be able to solve those challenging questions, you need to have some sort of a foundation in what arguments are, what assumption is, and so the 3 video lessons that you see on the top left hand corner, or the 3 video lessons we sent your way so that you build that foundation. Now, if you've not gone through these video lessons, they are still a part of your free trial. When you log into e-GMAT.com, you should be able to get to those video lessons. And suppose this webinar, take a look at these video lessons, go through them. They have numerous exampple. They reinforce the methodology that you've learned in this webinar, or you will learn in this webinar. And essentially, the small investment will help push that ability to that next level. We also have some upcoming free webinars. So we have a free webinar on GMAT geometry that is tomorrow. About 24 hours from now. In this, we focus on solving difficult data sufficiency questions on quadrilaterals. Again, we start from the very basics. We talk about the process skills that you need to ace GMAT geometry, and then we focus just on quadrilaterals, and then we build on to those data sufficiency questions. And so again, if GMAT geometry is something that you struggle with, then definitely look at this one. And then next week we have one of our most popular webinars. That's a webinar on how to go from 0 to 100, or in other words, how do you build that personalized study plan to get to a 730, 740, or a 760 score. That's next Saturday on 30th of October. Again, in this we start with the foundation of what the GMAT is, go build towards a study plan, and then we go even beyond that to say, hey, once you have a study plan, once you can see that how you should tackle the GMAT, what metrics should you track? How do you know if you're studying properly and you're actually moving towards that 730, 760 goal? Even retakers who've been studying for the GMAT for a few months, when they come in and they say, okay, I've been able to get to a 730, 630, 640, they get their improvement plans in this webinar as well. Okay, with that, let me hide this. So let's kind of get to know you guys a bit better. I want to figure out, what your target GMAT score is. Then the next question that I want to know is, when is it that you're planning to take the test? Let's get that data in here as well. And I know a couple of you have raised hands. I'm going to move to the next layout where you'd be able to post your questions. So you won't have to raise your hand. You can just post your question right away. So let's look at the second question over here. And then the third piece, which I'd like to know about you guys, is essentially, how do you plan to go about taking the GMAT? When do you? So which GMAT test do you plan to take? Just broadcast results as well over here. Again, the 3 options here are in the in-center GMAT, the online GMAT, or if you've not decided, you could go either way. Then that's something that you could really say. Now, with regards to the target GMAT score, the 730 to 750 bracket, it's the biggest segment here. Those surprises, usually that is the case. The 760 or higher bracket is another significant segment, as well as the 710, 720 bracket. And then we have about 15% of you who are in that 600 to 700 bracket. Let me clear that. Again, this kind of tells you the makeup, the ambition of this group as a whole. What is it that you're striving for? And again, when you're aiming for that 710, 720, or 730, you want to make sure you understand you're aiming to be among the top 10 percentile of students. So what an average GMAT test taker does, you've got to do something, I'd say something better to get to that top 10 percentile. With regards to when do people plan to take the test, we have a few folks who plan to take the test in the next 15 days. I hope you are within 30 to 40 points of your target GMAT score. But then we have about three equally sized groups, each in about 20 to 30% of folks over here. About 26% who haven't taken a date. We have about 27% who have the GMAT in a month to 45 days, and then another 22% in 46 to 75. And then we have, almost an equal number of people in that next 30-day period, whether you look at the next 15 or the following 15 days or so. Okay, and then again, majority of you want to take the test in center, about 23% still online, and then about 16% haven't decided as of yet. Okay, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the presentation pane. As I go there, the screen will change for you. Let's just do that. So let's move to the presentation pane. Now, you should be seeing CR1 pre-thinking for assumptions. I'm going to put in a yes/no poll. If you see CR1 pre-thinking for assumptions, then please select yes. Otherwise, select no. So again, I won't ask you to type when I don't need a qualitative response from you. So that way, just a yes/no poll helps a lot more. All right, perfect. Most of you see that. If you don't see the presentation, then essentially just join again or so. So just the layout of this screen over here, you see a presentation, you see a Q&A or a question and answer pod. That's what Q&A stands for. That's right below the presentation. During the presentation, if you have any question in context of what I'm talking about, please feel free to post your questions over there. And Sandeep or Harsha would respond to this. Also, there's a blank space on the right-hand side. This is the space for my questions. So I'm going to put in polls over there. I'm going to put in yes/no question. I'm going to put in a short answer pod, such as the one that you see at the bottom right-hand corner. And again, the idea really is that this is a place where you give qualitative feedback in response to the questions that I'm asking. Okay. So there's essentially three parts of this webinar. And the first part, I'm going to take about another 6 minutes to talk about e-GMAT. So this is where it says your MBA. We're going to talk a bit about e-GMAT. For many of you, this is your first interaction with someone from the e-GMAT team. I'm going to tell you a bit about who we are, some of our achievements, and just to really help you see if we are the right course for you. So that's going to be about 6 minutes. Then we'll go right into the core of the session. That's going to be for about 2 hours or so. And then towards the end, if you have questions that do not pertain to GMAT critical reasoning, but pertain to other aspects of the GMAT or your MBA application, that's I'll be happy to tackle those questions in this third part, which is what I call as an open-ended Q&A. And yes, the session is being recorded. You'll get the recording. It'll also be available on our YouTube channel. So with that, let's start with this part over here, which is an introduction to e-GMAT. Now, e-GMAT, we as a course, we've always followed a very different path from what a typical online course does. And to really kind of talk about that difference, I think you've got to understand how learning is imparted in the world today. So if you think about the architectures of learning that exist, or there are two different architectures that exist. One is what I call as the book-based architecture, where essentially there's very little feedback built into that architecture. Most people go through the same content regardless of their strengths, their weaknesses, or so. And then the other architecture is what we call as a private tutoring-based architecture, where there's a lot more feedback, where your learning's personalized to your needs. And at e-GMAT, we've always followed this private tutoring-based architecture, whereas most courses follow the book-based architecture. And because last year we actually started what I call as a second generation of private tutoring architecture, and because of that, we've actually had some disproportionate results when it comes to success. So let's kind of go there. Is the audio coming through loud and clear? I mean, it should be absolutely clear from what I can see. Yeah, I mean, if the voice is echoing, you probably have two windows open. That's for a couple of you. Other than that, there should not be any echo. So what I'm going to share, what I'm showing here is a chart of the number of 700 plus scores that have been reported till October 15 this year, and it compares the number that the same companies reported last year. So one thing that you can really see is the relative numbers, but the other thing that you'd see is the delta in numbers. So for us, the number of scores has gone up by more than 3x this year. For most other companies, that number is actually fairly similar. And again, the reason for that is these investments in what I call as AI and analytics that have helped more and allowed us to help more and more students go to those higher GMAT scores or so. And again, this is comparative performance. In fact, because of this, we've accounted for more than 50% of all 700 plus scores reported. And again, this compares us to all the other 12 partners that are there on GMAT Club overall. And this is the first time this has happened in the history of GMAT Club. No other partner has been able to account for a majority of 700 plus scores. Not only that, we've also accounted for most 730 plus scores, or most comeback successes, as well as most 100 point score improvements. These are the other metrics that we care about. And again, it's all thanks to the feedback and that's enabled by AI and the analytics that leads to what I call as precision targeting, last mile push, that allows us to push more and more of those 650 scores to those 700 to 760 scores or so. Now, I'm going to give you a glimpse of how that translates to personalization in one aspect of your preparation, which is just building that first study plan, which is something that you do when you start studying for the GMATs. And you think about in general, getting to a score of 720 or higher, which majority of you are aiming for. The way you've got to go about doing this is the first thing you have to do is to kind of visualize the path to your goal. And this is the study plan step over there, where you say, hey, I can see the battlefield. This is how I'm going to get to my score. These are the areas that I'm going to focus on. These are the areas that I'm going to ignore, because there will be some areas that you will need to ignore. Getting to a 720, 730 means strategizing over there. Once you have that clear path, then you actually go and execute on that path, which is where steps 2 to 4 come in. So you have that clear path. You actually then go to the concepts that you need to learn. You get feedback that you've actually learned those concepts. Just learning those concepts isn't enough. You've got to know how to apply those concepts as well, and you need to appropriate feedback over here as well. And then you need to get so good at doing this that you are in that top 5, top 7, or top 1 percentile, if that's what your aim is. Okay, so let's kind of start and talk about how do you do that step 1 at a very brief point. I'm going to talk about a student who starting at a 600 and is aiming for that score of 720. Anyone over here who kind of recognizes with the student? 600 starting score, aiming for that 720 or so. We have a few people here. That's good. Okay, so at e-GMAT, when you think about building your study plan, you do it in 3 steps. In fact, if you go to our homepage, you can see about 4 case studies around there where we show the actual study plans. The first step is you figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, which is what we call as quantifying your starting abilities. Then you define the milestones that will get you to their target GMAT score in an optimized manner. And then you make sure that you learn the right things. You either start practicing or you start learning, depending on what your current ability is and where you want to go. And each one of these 3 steps is really important, because again, this is how you decide where you spend your time and how you spend your time. Okay, so how do you get your starting abilities? We offer a Sigma X mock. It's the world's only mock test that gives you your starting abilities. The only other way to get your starting abilities is to take the real GMAT, then order an ESR, which tells you your starting abilities. Okay, so you take a Sigma X mock, you get your starting abilities, and you've got to set your milestones. So this is where we've looked at about 10,000 ESRs, compiled data from it. We've done essentially built a neural network on top of it to tell you if you have a certain starting ability and if you have a certain target GMAT score, what target abilities should you aim for? What is that shortest distance? And what it does is it takes your current quant and verbal scores, it takes your current starting abilities, it then tells you what your target quant and target verbal scores should be. Not only that, it also tells you what should your abilities be to achieve that target quant or target verbal score. So here in this case, for example, what you can see is, to get to a V38, this person needs to excel in SC and CR and really just say, hey, because his starting ability in RC was lower, to really say, hey, in RC, you don't need to focus as much. You need to do an SC and CR just because for you, that's an easier part to that V38. So that AI does all of that for you. And so again, it generates that plan. Why? Because once you can see the battlefield, you've got to be able to see, okay, how much time do I need to spend? So you have your starting abilities on the left, you have your target milestones on the right, and then you have how long do you need in each subsection to get to from that starting point to that end point. And again, I know you can't see the fonts, but if you're an e-GMAT student, you probably experience this because this is what you get over there, and there you can see the fonts. It also tells you, hey, this is what you're starting with, this is when you're ending, and it estimates this time over here based on your inputs with regards to how much effort you can put in. And then it also generates a calendar view where you can really see when you're studying what. Okay. Again, this took a lot of effort, about 1,000 hours to build something which was that precise. But the idea really is, if, since then about 8,000 students have used it, so when you split that effort, that's basically about less than about 8 minutes or 7.5 minutes per student, which we spend so that you guys can save tens of hours preparing for the GMAT. This is just an example of how that personalization leads to the right kind of focus, which leads to such disproportionate scores. Okay. And again, you can see many of these. In fact, this year, it's not just these scores. If you look at our YouTube channel, it has reported about 10 times as many success stories as any other YouTube channel. So YouTube channel from, let's say, Crack Verbal or Target Test Prep or Manhattan Prep or so, and you can read those success stories, and you can really see how that personalization translates to student success. So, and also you can connect with me on my LinkedIn. We have about, I think right now about close to 20,000 students who are connected with me on my LinkedIn, and we post about 5 to 6 articles every week, updates on what's going on in the MBA world, also some research. For example, the article number 3 over here was a research that we did where we talked about how MBA admissions are kind of stacked against international students. We provided data around that. Okay, with that, I'm done with the first part of the session. I actually didn't have a whole lot of questions. That was good. You guys were listening. There was just one question where someone asked, "Hey, 200 is that all?" And so and Harsha, how many actual 700 plus scores do you deliver? And so if you want to know that, you can actually click on this last piece over here. The real number is about 3,300 scores per year or so that we deliver, and I provide evidence in this number 3 over here or so. Okay, with that, let's go into the core of the webinar. Let's talk about how are you going to excel in pre-thinking? How are you going to get a jump start to excel in pre-thinking? That is. So here's what the agenda is. We're going to talk about how you prepare for the GMAT today. Then we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise where think of it as understanding the foundation of pre-thinking, starting from a warm-up to kind of solving a couple of intense arguments. So this is kind of that warm-up over here and going from warm-up to intense, and then applying that to 2 difficult questions. Remember, our agenda was to make sure to prove to you that how can you use pre-thinking to answer some of the most challenging questions. And then from that point on, you will tell you what is it that you need to do next. How can you cement what you've learned over here, including telling you where would you get more resources to practice with really good solutions that will reinforce this learning. So in a nutshell, we'll talk about how you prepare today, and then we'll discuss, hey, how can you excel on the GMAT, especially in GMAT CR, and then what are the next steps. So let's talk about your current approach. And what I'm going to do, I need a couple of poll questions that I need to put in. So before we talk about it, I want to talk about what pre-thinking is, because to answer those questions, you need to know what pre-thinking is. Pre-thinking is thinking of one assumption, potential assumption means one correct assumption in your mind before you look at answer choices. So pre-thinking, a couple of things which are there is pre-thinking needs to be done before you look at any answer choice. So one of the big things that people struggle with when it comes to pre-thinking is kind of ensuring that they don't look at the answer choices. Why? Because they are tempting. The second thing is pre-thinking is not about predicting the answer. An argument can have multiple assumptions. You're looking at one good assumption over here. And then the third thing, which is there, is a skilled pre-thinker, after reading the arguments, able to do this in about 15 seconds. Now, you won't be able to do this in 15 seconds in this session or even tomorrow or even day after tomorrow. But if you put in the effort for about 4 days, you'd be able to do this in about 15 seconds. When I say 4 days, about 8 to 10 hours or so. So it does require that rigor. But once you do this, the rewards are disproportionate. They are, I mean, critical reasoning becomes a piece of cake. And pre-thinking is something that you use for every CR question type, every argument-based CR question type, including assumption, strengthen, weaken, evaluate, fill in the blanks, paradox, as well as boldface. Okay. The reason why I'm talking about this is because this term has existed, but it's been abused, and people usually consider pre-thinking as predicting the answer, and that's why we had to define it so precisely, so that people don't think that it's black magic. It's a process. Pre-thinking is a process. It's not black magic. It's a logical approach to answering CR questions. Okay. So with that, let's kind of talk about which methodology do you follow, and predominantly there are two methodologies that GMAT aspirants follow. One is they read the argument, they go to the answer choices, and they come back to the argument. They do this back and forth till they reach the final candidate. Then the second methodology is they read the argument, they pre-think the assumption, and then evaluate the answer choices, just going back to the argument only as often as needed. So I have about 125 students here. I need to get at least 50 responses before I broadcast the results. Why? Because otherwise, if I broadcast them too soon, your responses is going to be biased by what others say. So let's get 50 responses so that I can broadcast the results. I have 43, 45, 47. I have 51. Let's broadcast, or right now the number has gone up. It's close to 60. That's excellent. So one of the things, you're here in this webinar, participate. It's going to make this webinar a lot more fun. As long as you're respectful and participating, and participate, it just helps everyone, including yourself. So yeah. So for me, I see about 51% of you in methodology 1. I want to try and push you guys towards methodology 2. I also see about half of you are in methodology 2. I'm gonna, for those of you who use methodology 2, I want to make sure that you get better at pre-thinking, that you know how to reduce time to pre-think, and how to improve your precision while pre-thinking. What does it take to do that? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now pre-thinking is a method, but every method requires certain prerequisites. For example, if you want to, in soccer, if you want to become a good penalty shooter, you've got to have mental toughness. You also have to have a good energy in your legs to be able to hit the ball fast, and those are prerequisites. In the same way, pre-thinking also has a certain sort of prerequisites, and one of the most important prerequisites that you need, not just for pre-thinking, but just in general to ace GMAT critical reasoning as well as reading comprehension, is the ability to visualize. And visualize means imagine, which means when you read the conclusion, you've got to be able to imagine it in your mind. When you read an answer choice, you've got to be able to imagine it in your mind. In some cases, you may have to take on numbers to really translate that conclusion into actual scenarios. In other cases, you have to imagine it as more logical ways. So, but the notion of visualization needs to happen if you want to pre-think. Without visualization, there is no way you can pre-think. The second thing is constructing the argument. You have to think like the author and build what we call as the logical structure that the author is using to push his claim forward. When you think about an argument, the whole purpose of an argument is that the author wants to push his claim forward, which is what that claim is, the conclusion. And the author usually gives you an explanation of why you should believe in that conclusion. Understanding the author's logic is fundamental to be able to pre-think. And once you have that, the easy piece is this, what we call as the falsification question, because if you can visualize, if you can understand the logical structure, then this is just kind of fill in the blanks thing. And if you can do 1 and 2, 3 is a piece of cake. When you fail to pre-think, most people don't fail to formulate the falsification question. Most people fail to visualize or fail to build that logical structure. So as you practice today, the arguments that you work on, try and figure out where in visualization you're faltering, or where in building that logical structure are you faltering. Okay. So with that, let's kind of start having some fun now. I want to talk about what an assumption is, and to do that, I'm going to give you an argument which is very close to your heart. And the purpose of giving you that argument is to really tell you everyone can pre-think, because this argument that I'm going to share with you is something that you visualize day in and day out. So if you can visualize it, you can come up with an assumption. So here's the argument. In the short answer pod, put in your answers. What do you think is the assumption here? All right, so just type in and press enter, and when I get about 20 responses, I'm going to broadcast results. So even though you can't see your response, I'm still getting it. So don't worry about it. Nothing's getting lost in the system. Okay, I have about 20 responses. Okay, guys, not in the Q&A pod. The pod below below the presentation is the question and answer pod. That's for your questions. It says question and answers. It's your questions and our answers, not our questions and your so it's your questions and our answers, and not the other way around. The pod on the right is where you put in your answers. Okay, and there's some really good answers that I see. Okay. Ivy League colleges do not take students who score 500, below 500 is what it should be, but yeah, you have the right sentiment. Ivy League colleges need GMAT scores higher than, or more than, it should be higher than 500, because the score is a countable quantity. College admits greater than 501 score. Again, the sentiment's correct over there. Some of you are saying Joe needs this. That's not exactly an assumption, but most of you have gotten the right sentiment. So essentially what's going on over here is, let's kind of visualize the conclusion first. And again, this is fairly simple, but I still want you to go through the exercise, formal exercise of visualizing. So think about, the conclusion says, therefore he will not, the author's making his claim here, he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So imagine someone like Joe standing there and him being getting a rejection letter, and 100 Joes standing there and all of them getting a rejection letter. And then you really say, hey, Joe has a score of 500. All of those Joes, or that particular Joe has a score of 500 and is getting that rejection letter. You've got to visualize that, and you say, okay, he's getting a rejection letter regardless of anything else on his profile over there. And so the assumption then that's there is that, hey, a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League college. And you guys were able to come up with this. You were able to figure out what was the jump that the author made. Why? Because you could visualize this even without any formal training. The only piece which I would like to add to what you put in over here is this beats someone like Joe. Why? Because the conclusion is about Joe. It's not about the Prince of Saudi Arabia. So Prince of Saudi Arabia may get into an Ivy League college with a score of 500. Joe probably cannot. Joe cannot, not probably. The author is very certain that Joe cannot. Okay, and that's the only piece. An assumption is always tied to the subjects in the conclusion. But other than that, good job visualizing this over here. So if you've been able to figure out what an assumption is, then tell me what is the formal definition of an assumption. What do you guys think is the formal definition of an assumption? Again, I'm going to remove broadcast results. Let's get about 18 to 19 responses before I broadcast the results once again. Okay, about 14 responses, 15 responses, 18, 19. Oh, got 20 responses. That's good. Let's broadcast results. Unstated statement that supports the conclusion. Unstated fact that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. That's a really good answer. Interpret hidden logical conclusion. Okay, not necessarily. An assumption doesn't need to be a claim or a conclusion. Unstated premise. Every assumption is an unstated premise. Every unstated premise is not an assumption. Something that needs to be true in order for the conclusion to stand. That's good. So some of you have come up with really good answers. Others kind of are around the right idea, but not as precise. An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. And here again, you can see the first thing is an assumption is linked to the conclusion of the argument, and then that's why the definition comes in. It's not linked to anything else but the conclusion in the argument, as per the definition. Now, in a majority of the cases, it will also be linked to the facts or the premises presented in the argument, or the counter premises if the author uses counter premises, because it's as an assumption has to flow along the logic of the argument. Okay. The second thing is it's an unstated idea, which means that you shouldn't be able to infer the information that an assumption provides from the information that's given in the argument. Okay. And then the third thing, which is probably the trickiest thing when it comes to the assumption pieces or assumption questions, is that notion of what constitutes must be true. Because an assumption has to be true for the conclusion to be valid. Okay, and this is where the GMAT tests you on. Do you understand, given the logic that the author is presenting to you, what is required or what is must be true versus what is not? So that's, we're going to build on this notion. We're going to talk about unstated and must be true aspects through examples in this session. So what this translates to, and this is, I want you to write down this definition. I'm going to ask you to write down 3 things in this webinar. This is the first of those 3 things. This definition, an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So the correct assumption has 2 attributes, or the correct answer for you. Why? Because you'd be solving a multiple choice question. Will have 2 attributes. One is it will provide new information, which comes from this unstated thing over here. This is where it does. And then the second is it will satisfy that must be true condition. Now I want you to visualize what that must be true means, and to do that, we're going to talk about the argument being this house. So let's assume this argument's this house, and you have 3 supporting pillars, and you have this roof, which these supporting pillars are making sure that the roof stays upright, it doesn't cave in. So your roof is that conclusion. Okay. So let's kind of see what happens, and we're going to call these 1, 2, and 3 just for simplification. So what I do is I'm going to remove pillar 1, and roof stays upright. So is number 1 an assumption? If I remove that pillar and the roof stays upright, is number 1 an assumption? Yes, no? The answer is no, it's not. Why? Because the conclusion can still stand by its own. Yes, the presence of that pillar made that roof stronger, but if I remove it, it still didn't go down, so it's not an assumption. I removed number 3 as well. This roof still stays upright, which means number 3 is not an assumption. Now both number 1 and number 3 were premises, or in other words, they were strengtheners. They made the roof stronger. They were not an assumption. Okay. So let's kind of bring this back again, and this time instead of removing 1 and 3, I'm going to remove number 2. The roof caved in, and because it caved in, this means number 2 is an assumption. So just as a visualization, if you remove a piece of information, or from an argument, then that, or if there's a piece of information which, if it's not true, if it's not present to support my conclusion, and in its absence, the conclusion breaks down, that piece of information is your assumption. Okay, and that's why we call it the essential pillar or the must be true pillar of an argument. So think of this visualization, and as we solve questions, there are going to be about two questions right away where you would see it used. One is going to be highway miles, where you'd see it used again in about 3 answer choices. The only way you'd be able to reject incorrect answer choices is by by kind of applying this understanding of must be true. Okay, so what does must be true mean? Must be true essentially means is if this information that your assumption provides is not true, then the conclusion can break down, or it can no longer hold true, or which it kind of leads to that definition of conclusion. So let's kind of apply that must be true notion into the assumption that we came up with to really justify if it must be true, or to justify that it is must be true. Okay, so same argument over here. You can see this argument. All right. So let's talk about what does falsifying the conclusion mean. Falsifying the conclusion means that Joe gets admission despite scoring 500. If that happens, we've falsified the conclusion. We've destroyed the conclusion or invalidated. They're all the same things. Okay. So how do we figure out that the statement that we came up with, if that's a true assumption? What's the litmus test? This was the statement that we came up with, that a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. So the question we ask is this must be true? You know, if the statement is no longer true, then will Joe get admission in an Ivy League college? Okay, so here is something that you need to know, and this is something that you probably a lot of you don't know. When you say this statement is not true, by definition, what you're also saying is that its negated version is true. Okay, and I'm going to prove to you why that is the case. So when you say this statement is not true, then this negated version, a score of 500 for someone like Joe, becomes acceptable to Ivy League colleges. That becomes true. So let's evaluate if that becomes true, what happens to my conclusion. So I'm going to focus just on this. Okay, if this negated instance is true, does my conclusion break down? And the answer to that is absolutely. Why? Because if a score of 500 for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges, then I as an author, I cannot make my claim with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. So that's the must be true notion of the correct assumption. Now some of you may be saying, how can you say that if I say a statement is not true, by definition I'm also saying its negated version is true? So let's look at this over here. When you say Harvard has the best MBA program, and if you say this statement is not true, by definition, what you're also saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or you're also saying that an MBA program that is as good as Harvard or better than Harvard exists. Is it not true? If you say this statement is not true, you are saying this piece over here. Can I get a yes or no in the short answer pod? Right? By definition, you're saying that. Okay. So this is what I call as the code composed in your actions and statements. Let's look at this over here. If you say, let's look at this statement, John runs faster than David, and if this is not true, by definition, what you're also saying is that John does not run faster than David, or David can be just as fast or faster than John. Okay. Again, any doubts on this? The not true part and how it translates to alternate statements? No. This is simple. So when you say a statement is not true, what you're saying is its negated version is true. What is debatable? Harvard has the best MBA program? Yeah, when you say if it's debatable, then you're saying Harvard might not have the best MBA program. That's basically what this translates into. So it translates into one other statement as well, according to you. Okay, so coming back to this, so if an answer choice is must be true, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of that negated version of that answer choice. That's kind of the notion of it, right? Think of it as that pillar where the essential pillar. If you go back to the house and if you remove pillar number 2, what would happen to the roof? If you go back to the house and you remove pillar number 2, what would happen? It will collapse. So that's removing the pillar is the presence of the negated version. That's 1:1. Okay, and it all stems from the fact that by definition an assumption needs to be an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So if you need the conclusion to be true, you remove the assumption, the conclusion will become invalid. Okay, it also cuts the other way. If you're looking at an incorrect answer choice, which means that the answer choice is not must be true, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of that negated version of that answer choice. Okay, let's take the same example. Let's take an answer choice and evaluate. This answer choice says a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. Okay, let's ask ourselves, do we need this to be true for this conclusion to be valid? And let's kind of look at this over here. A score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. See? So if I say that this is not true, then its negated version becomes true. The score of 500 becomes a good score. Let's ask ourselves, does my conclusion break down in the presence of this statement? Okay, will Joe get admission? Not really. Why? Because when you think about how the author has formed his argument, it's not built on the foundation as to whether you call a score of 500 a good score or a bad score. It's just built on the fact that, hey, here is a number 500. In other words, the author can replace 500 by 600, 650, 700. The logic in the argument will not change. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why you've got to understand the logic in the argument, which was step number 2 that we talked about. All right. So let's kind of go over here. So again, the skills that we will focus on in this entire piece. So with this, what I did was that we kind of talked about the 3 pieces over here, which is visualizing the conclusion, understanding the author's logic. What we are going to now learn is how to formulate the falsification question. Now, we did it on a very, very simple example. We're also going to push the difficulty level of the examples so that we build on that strength of visualizing and understanding the author's logic. Can I say that assumption is logical negation on key evidence? Once this logic is negated, it will validate the conclusion. Not really. It's not a logical negation. So in this case, it just so happened that you were not negating the key evidence, you were supporting the key evidence in assumption. So an assumption will support the key evidence. Why? Because your conclusion is built upon the evidence over there. One of the big things that I don't want you guys to do with regards to this, and especially a lot of people come over here from, actually let me ask this question. When someone asks this question here, anyone over here who's prepared for the Indian entrance exam called the CAT? Yes, no? If you've prepared for the Indian entrance test called the CAT, then you've learned what, and CAT has a critical reasoning portion. That portion is what we call as formal logic. The GMAT is not formal logic. So if you kind of try and apply the notion of CAT's critical reasoning to the GMAT, you're going to find yourself struggling. It does apply a bit to the inference part of critical reasoning, but not when it comes to argument-based questions. Okay, the GMAT CR is much higher level reasoning than what CAT critical reasoning is. So again, don't go to formal logic, don't go to formulas, build skills to visualize, and as you will see in the upcoming examples, finding assumptions is about understanding the reasoning that the author uses and then figuring out what is required to essentially support that reasoning to make the conclusion unbreakable. That's what you're doing over here. Okay. So in general, for the correct answer choice, if guys, not in the short answer pod, and again, you'll get the answer in about a couple of examples or so. So hold on to that thought, and you'd get the answer. You probably don't even need to ask me this question. Okay. Okay. Now, for the correct answer choice, what's going to happen is that the conclusion will not hold true when you negate that answer choice. For the incorrect answer choice, the conclusion, the roof will still continue to stay strong. That's just the litmus test for must be true. So with that, you now have some sort of a foundation in what an assumption is. What I want you to do is to learn how to pre-think. Okay, so we're going to do some sort of a warm-up marathon or so. So what the process that we're going to follow is, I'm going to give you an argument. This is going to be a much more challenging argument. I'm going to give you about 2.5 to 3 minutes to tell me what does the author assume here. Now, remember, I'm not going to give you answer choices. I'm going to tell you what does the author assume here, and then once I get your answers in, then I'm going to really go about my process of doing pre-thinking, and then we're going to look at, how was my process different from how you went about doing pre-thinking, and why is it that the way I go about doing this leads to much more repeatable results and higher quality results or so. Okay, so with that, get a pen and paper ready. Why? Because you will need a pen and paper. I'm giving you 2.5 minutes just to pre-think. Okay, so or in other words, I'm giving you 2.5 minutes just to read 80 words, visualize those, build that logical structure, and tell me what an assumption is. Okay. So with that, here is your argument. I'm going to mute myself for 2.5 minutes. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, another 30 seconds. Start putting your answers in the short answer pod. Okay, let's get a few more. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's broadcast the results. Okay. So I have some really good answers, a few very, very good answers, and some answers which kind of don't focus as much on the core idea. So some answers which talks about the reward system for full-time lecturers. They are, I would say, around the right idea. They're good answers. I would say other answers that talk about hey, research does not enhance student learning. The fact that tenured faculty is required to do research or so, those are not around the right piece overall. So let's kind of really look at this. Some of you actually have gotten it really right. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? The first thing we do is we focus on understanding the conclusion. We kind of visualize the conclusion over here, and we assign numbers to it. I'm going to really talk about what that means. Then we ask ourselves, hey, what facts does the author use to support his conclusion? Which is kind of asking the same thing. How does the author arrive at this conclusion? And then we're going to ask that pre-thinking question. Okay. Again, let's talk about step number 3 here before we do step number 2. What is that pre-thinking question that I've been talking about? So when we pre-think, we formulate a pre-thinking question, and this is what we call as the falsification method, or the formulate a pre-thinking question, and Aris, you're kind of coming from there. Okay. So the pre-thinking question comes from the very definition of an assumption. What is an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. Okay. Or in other words, what you can translate this to is that if you don't have the right kind of assumption or assumptions, the conclusion will break down. So if you were to think about that roof that we visualize, which and you have to prevent that roof from caving in, you will put in pillars. Where would you put in pillars? You'll put in pillars where the roof starts to cave in. Okay. In the same way, an assumption is built around those scenarios where the conclusion breaks down. Why? Because the job of an assumption is to prevent the conclusion from being invalidated or from breaking down. So if you want to figure out what the assumptions are in a particular argument, then ask yourself, how can I break this argument? What are the scenarios in which the argument will break down? If you can figure out those scenarios, you can put that assumption there, which says that, hey, given the information in this argument, this scenario is not possible. Okay, why? Because that's what the job of an assumption is. Does that make sense? Okay, figure out where the conclusion breaks, and then once you have the set of scenarios, you have a set of assumptions that you can play from. The assumption is such scenarios are not possible. Okay. So the question that you're asking is, under what circumstances, given the information in the argument, will the conclusion break down? That's the second thing that I want you to write down over here. Okay. That's the second piece. All right. So let's kind of look at this argument in this case. Okay. Now the first step, I want you to tell me which statement is the main conclusion. Let me just bring in over here. Let me just, here is my poll. Again, this poll has 4 statements. Just focus on the first 3 itself. Which statement is the main conclusion? 1, 2, or 3? Okay, let's get at least 60 responses. You guys solve this question. Each one of you actually solve this question. So you guys made a judgment as to which statement is the main conclusion. I have close to 40 responses. Let's get a few more. Which statement is the main conclusion? 1, 2, or 3? Let's get a few more. I am about 5 short. I have 55. Okay, I think I have 60. Yes. Let me let me broadcast the results. 52% of you consider statement 2 is the main conclusion, and you're absolutely correct. This is your main conclusion. This is what the author wants you to believe in. Remember, the conclusion is what the author wants you to, what the author promotes. Okay, it's not a fact given in the argument. It's what the author is arguing for. Okay, and the reason why the author presents all the facts in the argument. Now, a lot of people think statement 1 is the main conclusion because they see the word concludes over here and they say, okay, hey, because the word concludes is here, this must be the main conclusion. The question that you have to ask is the author arguing for it? Is the author debating whether this is correct or not? No, he's not debating that. He's actually using that as information to prove or to push his point forward that, hey, the reason why this difference exists is because of the reward system that is there for professors. Okay, so this is purely a data point, and this data point or this conclusion that has been made, it's not the author's conclusion. It is the conclusion made by whom? Who's made the conclusion that tenured faculty doesn't do as good a job as full-time lecturers? Who's made the conclusion? The research paper, yes. It's not the author's conclusion. In an argument, the conclusion is always by the author. Okay. The author takes this research paper as a data point, or the conclusion of the research paper as a data point, to essentially come up with his own conclusion to argue why this happened. Okay. And that's just on an unrelated matter. That's a very interesting thing. Why? Because sometimes the same statement in one context or in one argument can be a fact, and another argument it can be a conclusion. And I'm going to actually teach that. I'm doing a boldface session on Monday on GMAT Club. I'm going to teach the same thing in that boldface session because that is the piece that's tested there. Okay. Akshay says, isn't statement 2 also an assumption? Akshay, an assumption is an unstated idea, which means it would not be written. Okay. So statement 2 is your conclusion. Why is statement 3? What is the purpose of statement 3 over here? Why did the author write statement 3? Can you guys tell me? To support the conclusion, yes. To the reasoning for the conclusion, absolutely. You guys who are doing this, you do well in boldface, at least to a certain level in boldface questions. That's good. Okay. So this is your main conclusion. Hopefully everyone who got this wrong now understands why this is the main conclusion. Okay. Okay. So in general, let's kind of visualize this. I'm going slightly slow because I want to make sure we do the process, we do everything over here. So when the author says clearly the difference between professors in the tenured system and full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former, what the author is saying is maybe, okay, the reward system for tenured professors accounts for 40% of it accounts for teaching, 60% of it accounts for research, whereas for full-time lecturers, 70% of it accounts for teaching. It says, hey, because this reward system pays less emphasis over there, that's why tenured professors don't do as good a job. Okay. Again, the key thing over here is the author is actually not disputing the report's finding. Some people think about it. He's just simply blaming the reward system for it. Okay. So let's talk about statement number 3 over here. Just statement number 3. We've already established it's a supporting statement. Now, statement number 3. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Okay, and I have this poll question here that I want you to reopen this poll. Whose reward system? Is it just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both tenured faculty and lecturers, and neither? Really important to understand. Again, let's get about 40 responses here. Whose reward system is statement 3, which is this statement here talking about? Just tenured faculty. I have 32, 33, 34 responses. Close to 40 responses now. let me broadcast the results. 80% of you got it right. You're saying, hey, it's only tenured faculty. And that's really important because a lot of people, when they look at this, they say, hey, this is talking about comparing the reward system for tenured faculty with that of full-time lecturers. And some of you probably did that when you read the argument, but there's no information about full-time lecturers here. This word greater is a comparative word that compares the emphasis on research versus the emphasis on teaching. What it's saying is maybe there's 70% emphasis on research, 30% on teaching. Okay, is that clear? Did anyone make a mistake while reading this argument to really say, hey, we're comparing the reward system for two entities? You can be truthful. And again, that's a learning to really say, I'm going to be slow. I'm going to visualize this. Okay, as I do this, because this is what's going to lead to a mistake if I don't visualize this. All right. So with all of these pieces, now we understand the argument why the author has written this. This is what the author is trying to prove. Okay, he's using this data to come up with the conclusion, and then he's given this supporting statement to support the main conclusion. So let's kind of ask ourselves the pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will my conclusion break down? Let's translate that question to this. Okay, conclusion breakdown means I can't blame the reward system. So under what circumstances can I not blame, or would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance, given that I already know that full-time lecturers do a better job, and given that I know that reward system for professors or tenured faculty, that's the same as professors, places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Okay, so here is the question. Can you guys see the falsification question and how this translates to the piece at the bottom in the context of the argument? Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, these are the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Okay, under what circumstances would you not blame the reward system? Can you see how this translates into this? Yes, no? Okay, one person says yes. A few more, good. All right. So, what are some of the circumstances in which you can't blame the reward system? Okay, it's over here again. So remember, an assumption is built around an area where the conclusion breaks down. So, what question should you ask? The question that you're asking is, under what conditions can you not blame the reward system? Or would the reward system not cause the difference that we see as per statement 1? Okay, that's all that we are asking. So in what scenarios can you not blame the reward system? If non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system, then you can't blame the reward system, right? If both entities have the same reward system, then you can't blame that. Can you see that? Yes, no? Yeah, if tenured professors don't act as per the reward system. So you may have a reward system, but tenured professors don't act as per the reward system, then essentially you can't blame the reward system. Okay. So here's the question: what if teaching requires a different skill set? So if the reward system played emphasis on the teaching, would they not acquire that skill set? Again, it doesn't take away the reward system. And you don't, the key about critical reasoning arguments is you don't have to think so much outside the logic. That's the beauty of understanding the logic over here. Now, if these are the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, then what are my assumptions? Non-tenured professors do not have an identical reward system. Most tenured professors care about the reward system. Okay. Can you see how when you pre-think, you can come up with assumptions fairly easily? When you kind of go through this entire process, you can come up with assumptions fairly easily. Okay. Now what I'm going to do over here is, now we had a pure argument, an e-GMAT argument. I'm going to now give you an official question, and this uh, uh, and this is something which is reward system has a deciding factor. Yes, it has to be a deciding factor. That's the foundation of the argument. Yes. Okay. Can I explain this first scenario? Okay, I'll explain the first scenario over here. If non-tenured faculty, so you're comparing two entities in this argument. What are the two entities that you're comparing? You're comparing tenured faculty and the non-tenured faculty. Let's kind of go over here. What are the two entities that you're comparing? Tenured and non-tenured. And what are you saying? You're saying, hey, non-tenured or lecturers are better because the tenured faculty has a reward system that does not allow them to focus on teaching. So what are the assumptions that you're making? The assumption that you're making is that non-tenured does not have the same reward system. Okay, let's kind of, if I were to draw a parallel scenario, let's say if I were to really say, how many of you, let's kind of talk about stocks. Most of you know stocks. Okay. Now, what is the assumption here? When I say buy Google rather than Microsoft, when I say Google means Google stock. You can't buy the entire company, but because Google had a great quarter. Okay. What are you assuming here? If I'm giving you this recommendation, what is an assumption that's built into this recommendation? Yes, Google had a better quarter than Microsoft. Absolutely. Or Microsoft did not have a great quarter. That's the same logic here. Okay. Exactly the same logic. Tenured faculty does worse because the reward system does not pay a greater emphasis. Then non-tenured faculty does not have the same reward system. It's exactly the same piece. Okay. So, and it just, when you translate the logic, you're going to find that this logic repeats again and again and again. It's just visualization allows you to map the argument into to really categories, which is kind of, if you are an e-GMAT student, you see those comparison categories and entities categories over there. So how many of you are concerned about timing here? And you really say, hey, I understand this seems to work good. This is there, but I'm concerned that it's going to take very long. How many of you are concerned about timing here? Yes, definitely no. Okay. Most of you are. Okay. So I just want to put this piece over here to really say, hey, I want to talk about this in the context of the results. Why? Because there are other people who will talk about tricks. They'll talk about, looking at answer choices and really rejecting them because of certain words or doing things a different way. Always ask those guys, what's evidence that you've delivered success? Not anecdotal, but statistical evidence, which is, a good proportion of people have delivered success. Why? Because everyone will have some success, because, all you need is a smart student to get success. But statistical success comes only through processes. Okay. And this success, where you've delivered a majority of success, only comes through processes over here. So when it comes to pre-thinking, it is a time saver when you do it right. But when you're learning it, you are going to take longer. This is how you go about doing this. So let's say, actually, let me explain this chart. This is a chart of accuracy on the y-axis. The higher you go on y-axis, the higher is the accuracy. And time you spend is on the x-axis. So let's talk about how you would feel. Let's say you're this guy at point number 1. Okay. As you start to do pre-thinking, two things will happen. You're going to take longer, all right? And your accuracy will go up. Why would the accuracy go up? Because you get a much better understanding of the argument. If you're doing it right, you'll learn how to visualize. You'd be able to really reject answer choices much more confidently. In fact, within the first 7 to 8 questions, it's very likely that you're going to start and see the various argument structures where you're comparing two entities, where you're comparing segments or so. Okay. Now, some people at point number 2 will say, when they see themselves taking longer, they don't look at higher accuracy, by the way, but they see themselves taking longer and they ask themselves this question, say, why the hell am I following this method? I worry about timing. And they would give up on it. And is someone like this person over here who'd really say, hey, the moment I start taking longer, that worry that I'm taking longer takes over, and you know, as my belief in that method goes away. Does that happen, or has that happened with anyone? And again, remember, this is, no one's judging you over here. You're still preparing for the GMAT you've not taken. So trust in the method at that point, because every process requires that you build muscle, and you're building that visualization muscle. Until you don't have that muscle, you're going to take longer, because it's a new process. That's just, every new process takes longer, regardless of whether you're doing it in the context of critical reasoning or learning how to play soccer and so on and so forth. People who do this, what they would recognize, as they continue to follow the process, you're going to see similar sentence structures, you're going to see visualization start to be similar, you're going to get much better at understanding what is it that most does when it comes before a phrase or so, and as you do that, your accuracy will continue to go up, your time to answer questions will go down, and it'll go down drastically at a point. And at that point, you would really see, okay, now I understand how pre-thinking helps. Once you hit that point 3, I call this the hysteresis point, you will then not solve any question without pre-thinking. Okay. That's because that's when you've tasted the benefits of pre-thinking overall. Now, the difference between a person who gets to point 3 and who is stuck at 75th percentile still versus a 95th, 97th percentile is how consistently do you do pre-thinking. Because at point number 3, you know how to do pre-thinking. If you want to do it, you can do it well. But then I also see people who reach point 3 and they really say, hey, if an argument looks simple, I'm not going to do pre-thinking. But if it's complex, only then I'm going to do pre-thinking. And I'm sure some of those guys are over here too. And if you get into that habit, you know, you're going to sub-optimize, you're going to deliver a subpar performance. You still get 75th percentile, but not 95th percentile. But people who get to point 3 and really pledge that I'm going to always do pre-thinking, get to that 95th percentile, get to the, and those are the folks who, that's the difference between a 710 and a 740, frankly. Okay. But the 2 to 3 pivot is really important. And then from that journey from 1 to 3, point number 1 to point number 3 is about 20 to 25 arguments. And those 20 to 25 arguments will take you 7 to 8 hours. Okay. So that's really important that you need to understand. You're doing about 3 arguments an hour. That's the level of visualization and reviewing the answer choices you need to do. But trust me, once you do those 20 to 25 arguments, you will not follow any other method. You won't even ask the question why, because you'd start seeing the disproportionate benefits of pre-thinking. And there's some evidence. Here's one of our former students who really says, hey, understand the passage completely, take your time, equally pre-think, okay, an answer before looking at the answer choice. This one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. There's a guy who scored a 770, is studying at Booth right now. He scored a 700 in his first attempt. He did not do pre-thinking. Very smart guy, but did not do pre-thinking. And then came back to us and said, hey, I'm at a 700. I need to do better. I'm looking for Booth. I'm looking for Harvard. Help us. We diagnosed his problem. We said, you've got to do pre-thinking. We gave him an exercise to really figure out why he wasn't doing pre-thinking. And within 20 days, he was able to go from 35th percentile to 97th percentile in critical reasoning. Okay. And again, he says, Pre-thinking helps you focus on the logic and not deviate from the key argument or trap answer choice. You're going to see this play out in another 3 minutes or so in the next question. Harshit, who had a 220 point score improvement, says pre-thinking primes the mind and we're constantly on our toes while reading the paragraph or CR questions. As I said, pre-thinking is really useful for RC as well as CR. And essentially, so apart from comprehending the passage, this is more in the context of RC. We are speculating that in which direction the passage will orient or what logical jump has the author taken. So this part is the CR aspect to it. Okay. So with that, let's kind of start to do pre-think a bit more, and I want you to solve this one question. And again, this will look very simple, but if you do not do pre-thinking, you're going to find yourself struggling when it comes to answer choices, because the argument's fairly simple. So here is your argument. Okay, get a pen and paper ready, and here is the argument. Good luck, guys. And again, go slow. I'll give you 3 minutes on this. All right, guys, another 30 seconds. Get those answers in. All right, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2. Come on. If you're confused, choose any answer. And 1. Here's how you guys polled on this one. This is an official question, not an e-GMAT question, by the way. So let's kind of talk. So when you guys were going through the options, how many of you, tell me, how did you feel I'm going to keep my question more open-ended. How did you feel when you were going through this argument, and how did you feel when you were reading the answer choices? Well, this is 700 level. I mean, any question where the difficulty is less than 50% is 700 level. So how did you feel for argument versus the answer choices? You can say argument easy, answer choices easy, argument easy, answer choices difficult. All right. Answer choices are difficult. Good. I mean, yeah. So let's look at this over here. So what's going on? Very easy question from a reading standpoint, but it's really important to be precise about this. So what are we trying to do? What the highway commissioner is claiming is that the toll will increase the overall revenue by at least 50% every year. So what he's saying is, if you kind of visualize this conclusion, okay, what he's saying is, if last year our revenue was $1 million, then this year our revenue is going to be $1.5 million. Last year it was 10, this year it's going to be 15 million. That's all that he's saying. That's my visualization of conclusion. Okay. Just on a side note here, please, or more than, yes. I'm just call it 1.6. Whenever you have a range, take a number within that range is what I would say. And thank you for that correction. Coming back to another point on a side note, don't give yourself a pat on the back because you narrowed it down to 2 answer choices. That's one of the worst habits you can get in any verbal question. Okay. It feels very rewarding to give yourself a pat on the back and say, I rejected 3 answer choices and did that. For difficult questions, 80% of the people are able to do that. Remember that. And you're aiming to be in the top 10 percentile, not in the top 80th percentile or so. Okay, based on the data that I asked yourself. The second thing that I will tell you is that I'm going to look at this comment. Economists have an advantage in this question. Not really. One of the big problems that happens, which I've seen happen with lots and lots of people, is, and that's true in CR and RC as well. When you have a context, yes, it makes reading easier. However, sometimes because you have that context, you bring in your own knowledge of this and you mess it up. Okay. So that's, yeah, and then that happens. You bring in your own knowledge. And that's where, when it comes to the GMAT, whether you're looking at CR or RC, it's the questions are designed to be so high quality that your background will not matter. Even when you do humanities passages, the very fact that you may not know anything about American history is not going to be an impediment. Okay. So let's kind of look at this. How do you overcome it? You just don't worry about your background. You just be logical and focus on the information that's given over here. So what did we take away from here? My revenue will go by 60% or 70%. Let's take 70% in this case. If it was 1.1 million last year, it's going to be 1.7 million this year. Okay. So then the question really that I ask is, hey, how the hell do I estimate annual revenue? And how do I estimate annual revenue? How do I estimate annual revenue? As per the information given in the argument. Okay. Rate into distance. It's as simple as that. There's no cars there. I'm charging on a per mile basis. Okay. So the way I estimate annual revenue is how much toll am I charging per mile and how many miles in total are driven on highways. Now you can translate this into cars, and you can, total number of toll miles can be translated into cars multiplied by average distance per car or trips and all of that. But let's kind of keep things simple here. Okay. So what are we given in this case? We know that the toll per mile, we will increase the toll per mile by how much? By 50%. That's already given to us, right? So under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by at least 50%, provided this quantity will go up by 50%? We already know that. That's a fact that's given to us. Under what circumstances will the annual revenue not increase by 50%, provided that the toll per mile has been increased by 50%? What's the only scenario? The only scenario is if the total number of toll miles goes down, right? Fewer miles. Okay. If distance travel goes down or remains the same, it doesn't increase at all. Okay. Don't bring in price elasticity, please. I know then you're an economist, but don't bring the price elasticity. Keep things simple, in simple words. Okay. So the only possible scenario where the conclusion breaks down, if the total number of miles decreases, the assumption is total number of miles traveled does not decrease. If this is the case, which answer choice do you think is correct? E, yes. Not B, E. Okay, and that's where the must be true aspect is. So let's talk about choice B and say, why is it that choice B is wrong? What does choice B say? Choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from its current level. Why is choice B wrong? If the total number of trips go down, can I say with 100% certainty that the total number of miles will go down? Can I say with 100% certainty? No. Why? Let's say last year we had 1000 trips. Okay. Now this year, if we go to 900, does it mean that the total distance will go down 100%? Does it mean? No. What can compensate for fewer trips? What can compensate for fewer trips? More miles per trip, right? How long is yes. So then is that a must be true as per our definition of an assumption? Is that a must be true? No, it is not a must be true. Right? And that is the notion of must be true that you need to understand. It is, remember, an assumption is an unstated idea required for the conclusion to hold true. Is it required that the total number of trips remain the same? No. I can tolerate 10% reduction and still get more miles. People who chose choice B, are you clear why choice B is not must be true? Okay. By the way, if this were a strengthened question, choice B would have been a great strengthener, but it's not a good assumption. Okay. Let's look at choice E, our correct answer. The total distance traveled by vehicles on toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. If the total distance goes down, number of miles goes down, and my revenue will not increase. Okay. Again, the question that you have to ask is this must be true? So we've discussed choices B and E. Any other answer choice that you want me to discuss? Choice C, okay. Let's look at choice C. Choice C talks about average length of trip. If the average length of trip goes down, let's say earlier the average length of trip was 50 miles, now it becomes 45. What can compensate for average length of trip? Number of trips can go up, yes. Remember, please don't take the information from choice B into choice C. Okay, it is like a DS question. Yes. Again, the GMAT's testing the same skills across quant and verbal. It's about logic. So people who chose choice C, is it clear why choice C is not must be true? Is it clear? Okay. Choice D, the number of drivers who consistently avoid highway tolls by using secondary roads will not increase from its current level. Let's say earlier, 1,000 drivers avoided. Now that number is 1,100. What can compensate for these 100 drivers avoiding toll highways? What can compensate? The remaining drivers could go for longer trips. Newer drivers could come in, the remaining drivers could go for longer trips. Okay. Now, and that's kind of where, why, can you see why do we say that you've got to pre-think before you look at answer choices? What did answer choices do over here? It brought in a bunch of new terms that were not even mentioned in the argument, right? And once you start looking at this, you can throw pre-thinking out of the window. You can throw understanding the logic out of the window. You can also see why pre-thinking focuses you on the logic, right? You can see that. Yes, the answer choices are there for confusion. That's why they are there. They're not there to help you. Anyone who says they're there to help you is saying the wrong thing. Think of me as someone who creates questions. Why am I creating questions? As a test maker, to test your understanding. So my answer choices would be there to confuse you, not to help you. My argument is there to help you, not the answer choices. Okay. Someone says, how can choice B be a strengthener? Just look at this argument, look at choice B in isolation. Don't look at any other answer choice. Okay. Given the information in choice B, would your belief in the conclusion not increase? Given the information in choice B, would you not believe the conclusion more than you did just by reading the argument? Yes, you will, right? You're saying, hey, this choice is now telling me, despite increasing my toll by 50%, the number of trips will not go down. They can go up, but they will definitely not go down. This information wasn't there in the argument. If your belief in the conclusion has gone up, then yes, this becomes a strengthener. It's just not a must be true. The definition of a strengthener is any new piece of information that increases your belief in the conclusion. The definition of an assumption is an unstated idea, which means any new information that is required for the conclusion to hold true. Difference. Okay. And an assumption is a subset of the possible set of strengtheners. Every assumption is a strengthener. Every strengthener is not an assumption. Okay. Again, strengthen was not a scope of this, but the person who wanted the answer, hopefully you got an answer. If you did not understand the strengthen aspect, don't worry, we didn't cover it anyway in this. Okay. Questions? Yeah, others can be strengtheners too. Choices B, C, D, and E, all four of them were strengtheners. Absolutely. And that's what makes this question tricky, right? Because choosing between assumptions and choosing amongst four strengtheners, which one is an assumption, is a skill. And that's why this is a 700 level question. All right. So now we're going to up the ante. We are going to solve even more challenging questions. A couple of these, I'm going to solve 2 questions. These questions will make you cry at some point. Okay. So, and it's by design. Some of you at least. Now, I want you to go real slow in this question. I want you to be methodical. These questions are not difficult. Okay. The logic here is not difficult at all. But some of you will say, man, there are too many terms here. And to avoid getting confused, write down things, go slow. Now, I want 25 of you to select not answered so that I don't time you. You as a group time yourself. Once you select not answered, once 25 of you select not answered, then I'm going to show you the question, and then we're going to solve question 4 and then question 5, and we're going to discuss both questions. And then we're going to end the session. We're going to talk about how can you get better. Perfect. You can see 29 of you have chosen not answered. Thank you very much. Here is the question coming your way. I'm going to mute myself. Okay, about 45% of you are done. Another. Okay, last 15 seconds, but 65, 70% of you are done actually right now. All right, 80% of you are done. 3, 2, and 1. Let's get those answers in. This was a difficult question. I'm going to end the poll and let's broadcast the results. This is how you guys polled. We're going to do another question now. And then we're going to discuss both these questions as I mentioned. Let's get shall be will refuse. So the same process, click on not answered. I want 30 people to say not answered. I'm going to broadcast results so you can see how many people have said not answered. 21, 23, 24, 26, 27, 28, one more, 30. Good. And here is the next question. All right. So we have about 80% of you done. I'm going to give you another 5 seconds for the remaining folks to put in those answers. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results to show you how you guys have done. We have more convergence here than for the last question. Now, before I go to discuss the RDS technology question, let me just say this. This is a question that you will get only when you prove to the platform that, hey, I can solve 90th percentile questions. So it's not a question that you're going to get early on the test. And my purpose for offering for testing this official question here was not to actually instill a fear of critical reasoning in you. That's not the goal. It is a difficult question. Let me just say this. My purpose here was kind of threefold. First of all, to tell you that how can you make a CR question difficult? By doing two things. One is by making a complex argument, and the second is by making answer choices that are complex. So that's the first piece. That's the first reason, and you can really see both of those exist here. The second goal here is to demonstrate that when you pre-think, then even a complex argument can become fairly simple if you pre-think and decipher the argument properly. Okay. The third piece is to demonstrate how much crap can the official test makers put in the answer choices and how that crap messes you up. Okay. So let's kind of go through this. All right. So first thing, don't be scared of this question. There aren't very many questions like this, but if you can understand if you can be with me and understand how to do this, then you can tell yourself that no matter what question comes to me, I have the ability. You may not be able to do it, but I have the ability. I have it in me to understand the logic that this question is asking. Okay. So let's kind of focus on the conclusion. Okay. The conclusion says a number of V's, wordlanders, let's call them V's, receiving special program information probably did not increase significantly during these years. Okay. I want to talk about three things in this conclusion over here. It talks about, first of all, the number of V's, which means people who are outside of V's who may be receiving this program don't matter. Okay. The second thing that I want to talk about is it only talks about the special program information. It doesn't talk about everything. Okay, which means non-special programs or programs that don't have this facility don't matter. Okay. The third piece that I want to talk about is it's looking at this time period in 94 to 96, which means while evaluating answer choices, if there's something that doesn't talk about one or the time between 94 and 96, then most likely it's not going to be my correct answer. Again, it all stems from the fact that an assumption has to be linked to the conclusion. It's really important that an assumption be linked to the conclusion. Okay. When you guys read this conclusion, did you extract one or two or three or all of them out? That, hey, we only care about V's, so people outside of V's who may be receiving that special program don't matter. We only care about special programs, so non-special programs don't matter. And this is the time period that I'm going to worry about. Just one single statement extracting information from it. Okay. Did you guys do that? Just focus. That's visualizing my conclusion in some ways, or a component of that. Okay. All right. Now let's kind of visualize this and say, what is happening over here? What this is saying is that, hey, in 94, if there were 1 million people who received special program information, in 96 that number is still 1 million. That's basically what this is saying. And all of them are wordlanders, of course. So let's look at this, what's going on. So this is your main conclusion. All right. Your context says, I'm going to start with context here. It says, hey, there's a special property that RDS radios and broadcasters have, which is radio stations with RDS technology broadcast special program information that only radios with an RDS feature can receive. What this is saying is to get this special program information, you need a radio station that has that capability, and you need a receiver that has that capability. Okay, that's all that this is saying. It's a special property. You need a mated set, a transmitter and a receiver that have this capability. Now, between 94 and 96, there's something that happened. The number of broadcasting stations which had this capability, they increased, they more than doubled. Okay. However, and you can see however over here, which means that it's a contrast word. As you're going from statement 2 to statement 3, they're talking about slightly different things. The number of receiving radios that people had, or where you could listen to programs from, did not change a whole lot. In 96 and 94, they were the same. Okay. And then that's how the author is trying to arrive at his conclusion. He says the number of people who are receiving the special program information did not increase significantly. Okay. Now statement number 3 is supporting my main conclusion. Statement number 2 is going against the main conclusion. Why? Because if you have more transmitting stations, you should have more people. Also, structurally, you see statement 3 and statement 2 are connected by a however, and if statement 3 is supporting the conclusion, then statement 2 should go against the conclusion. And statement 1 provides the context. Okay. So that's kind of my logical structure over here. Is the logical structure clear to everyone? Is the logical structure clear? Yes, right? So then if the logical structure is clear, so context says to receive RDS programming, you need a mated pair. The number of RDS radios remain unchanged. The number of transmitting stations went a lot, increased a lot. Based on this, what we are saying is, hey, number of people receiving the special program information more or less remain the same. Okay. So the question that I'm going to ask is, under what conditions will I break my conclusion down? Under what conditions will there be a significant increase in the number of people receiving RDS programming if I have very few additional radios and if I have a lot more transmitting stations? So tell me, what are the possible scenarios in which I can break my conclusion down, in which I can falsify the author? What are those scenarios? If there are more people listening per radio, definitely. Okay. Or if there are new stations that cater to new ranges that were not served earlier. You guys are absolutely brilliant. I mean, you guys came up with this all by your own. Okay. So if radio stations cover areas where, hey, people had the RDS radio, remember, people could have still had that radio in 94, but there was no coverage. But because you put all of these stations, now they get coverage. Or if we start putting these radios in Starbucks, and so people per radio go up. Okay. And utilization, man, the economist in you is you're leveraging that economist in you over here. So both of them are good scenarios that break my conclusion. Everyone, can you really see in either one of these scenarios, I can shatter my conclusion using this? If I increase the people per radio, or if I increase this, number 1 is what we call as utilization. Can you guys see that? Yeah. If you guys can see that, and there's nothing difficult in this argument, my assumptions are the new stations should increase coverage, or people per radio remain the same. Unless a radio station without RDS, we don't care about those radio stations. Do we care about the radio station without RDS? No. Why? Because of the context that's given to you. And because my conclusion says this. You only made the second scenario, that's fine. That's okay. You understood the logic for this argument. Okay. So you guys are capable enough to decipher and come up with pre-thinking for this argument. Let's look at the answer choice analysis. Okay. And let me show you how you guys polled first. Here's RDS Technologies. Here's how you guys polled. You know, a lot of people love choice D. A lot of people love choices A and B as well. It's like the only choice that people didn't like was choice E. All right. Choice A is our correct answer. It's in line with our first pre-thinking. Choice A says, few if any of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94 broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached by RDS stations. Okay. Visualizing answer choices is very important, and it just shows up over here. Let's kind of translate this and visualize this. Few if any means almost none, okay, of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. These are your new radio stations. Broadcast to people who already had the RDS equipped radios but were living in areas that were not previously covered. This is increasing the coverage of RDS programming. Okay. Can I show the percentages again? I will show the percentages after I go through this choice explanation. First of all, can you see how this complex, crappy looking statement translates to this simple statement? Can you see that? Yes. Essentially, what we are saying is almost none of the new radio stations, increase the coverage of RDS programming. Let's kind of do the negation. The negation of this is at least some new radio stations, which is between 94 and 96, increase the coverage. If you're increasing the coverage, if you're transmitting to people where there was no transmissions, but they had the right kind of radios, then are more people receiving RDS programming? Yes. Am I breaking my conclusion? Yes. Right? So this has to be there. I need this pillar. Why? Because without this pillar, this is possible, and if this is possible, my conclusion breaks. I understand you want to talk about other answer choices, but can you see how choice A is in line with our first assumption that we came up with? Can you see that? I'm going to answer that question. What if no one owns RDS stations? And how did you put a yes in the center? You must have put, lots of spaces. Okay, a few more yeses. Perfect. Yes, it's very complex. And one of the reasons why you might make a mistake, and this is where if you're an e-GMAT in the strategic review piece, we really have a category where you say, I did the pre-thinking right, I got the logic right, but I did not take that logic or it did not translate the answer choice. And hence I messed up. And this is a classical case over here. Because if you find that this is where you're messing up, that you're not simplifying the answer choice, then what should you be doing? If you find that, hey, I get the logic right, I do pre-thinking right, but then I don't simplify the answer choices, and hence I make a mistake. What is the next step that you should be doing? You should be learning how to simplify answer choices, or you should be spending time to simplify answer choices. Because it's not the logic that's faltering you, it's not the process. Yeah. And once you do that, voila, you have the correct answer always. Okay, now let's talk about the question. What if no one outside of the 1994 coverage has any RDS technology, RDS radio station? And sometimes what answer choices do is provide a lot of additional information. When you say this to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached, then the answer choice is telling you that there is a set of people who are there who were not previously reached. So there is a finite number of people over there. And sometimes answer choices will do that. So good question. Is falsifying the right approach for other categories? No. The pre-thinking is slightly different over there. Remember, falsifying comes from the must be true. So you pre-think and strengthen too, but you don't ask the same question. Okay, so falsifying is just for assumptions and evaluate questions. Let's talk about choice B. I'm going to really show who chose choice B. RDS Technologies. You guys can see the answer choice you chose. Okay. All right. Now, before I go into the explanation for choice B, Can you tell me what an assumption is? The definition of an assumption? What is the definition of an assumption? And this is where fundamentals come. An unstated idea that must be true to keep the conclusion valid. Right? Everyone remembers that? Right? Now, let's look at this. Let's look at the answer choice, and we're going to translate this answer choice, and we're going to visualize this. In 1996, most Verlanders, most Vs, who lived within the listening area of an RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. I'm going to focus on this word most, and I'm going to translate this into 70%. Let's assume we call most as 70%. Okay. So what this answer choice then translates to is, in 1996, 70% of all Vs who lived within a listening area had a radio equipped to receive RDS. Okay. Everyone okay with that translation? Everyone okay with that translation? Yes, no? Perfect. Now, here is my question. My conclusion, what is my conclusion? That the number of people between 94 and 96 did not change a whole lot, right? No significant increase between 94 and 96. Now, for that to happen, do I need 70%? Or in other words, can my conclusion still not hold true if 20% of the people owned an RDS equipped radio in 94 and the same 20% of people owned an RDS equipped radio in 96? Is that 70% must be true, or is that most must be true? Is it required? No, it's not required. It is not a must be true. Very, very similar to choice B in highway miles, where it says, hey, the number of trips will not go down. Were you required to do that? Okay. I'm going to actually go to the notes pane. I think it becomes, the structure becomes slightly simpler when I have notes. Okay. All right. So, conclusion. Okay, everyone okay with the conclusion? Right? What is the statement, choice B? V's. I'm going to call them V's. I'm not going to type on Wordlanders. That's just too much info. V's. Okay. Now, this is translation of choice B. I'm using the word 70% as most. Everyone's clear with that as well? Everyone's clear with that? Right? Now, an inference given the information in argument is that 70% of V's there's no coverage here. Remember this. In choice B, there's no coverage here. Choice B is just talking about coverage in 96. But the inference is 70% also owned that in 94. Is that the correct inference? Why? Because the number of radios did not go up, right? If 70% was in 96, then 70% in 94 as well, more or less. Okay. Yes, no, a few more yeses. So my question is, which is also the must be true question, is do we need to keep Do we need that? Or in other words, can the conclusion not hold true if the number were 20% in 94 and in 96? The answer is yes, it can still hold true. It doesn't matter. What we are saying is that hey, the number between 94 and 96 is the same. It's not changed a whole lot. We're not saying what the number was in 94 and what the number is in 96, right? So then is choice B must be true? Is choice B must be true? Does it satisfy? No, it's not must be true. And this is the kind of confusing crap that they put in. And if you don't focus on the logic of the argument, you get confused. Okay. And some of you may say, man, this explanation seems very, very sophisticated. Yes, it is. But the point really is, now that you have that, imagine the amount of learning and the kind of processing that your brain has started to do. Okay. And imagine how much it will help you in processing less complex answer choices. And you will see evidence of this just in the next question. Equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease the station's listening area. Okay. Now, if there is no RDS technology in a station, can it broadcast RDS programming? The answer is no. So even if it decreases the station's listening area, it doesn't have any impact on us. Why? Because our conclusion only talks about RDS programming, not non-RDS programming. Okay, so that's not there. Let's look at choice D, the most popular choice. Okay, in 1996, V's who did not own radios to receive RDS programming. Do we care about people who don't own RDS radios? Do we care about those guys in my conclusion? No. Could not receive any programming. We already know this. Yes. Do we care about any programming? No. From RDS stations that began from the newer RDS station. RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94 are the newer RDS stations. This choice discusses people who did not have RDS radios. Okay. And this choice talks about, any programming which we are not concerned with. It talks about the wrong segment of people. It talks about the wrong kind of programming. It cannot be the correct answer. Okay. This is, it's not also an inference. This is new information, I would say. It's just not linked to my conclusion. We didn't know that they probably could receive non-RDS programming. Now with this answer choice, we know that they could not receive any programming. So there is new information. I wouldn't say this is inference. Okay, it's just not an assumption. Yes. But the first part, we already knew. The first line, the context tells us. Okay. So that's important. And that's where translating the answer choices is really important. So what did you guys learn from this question? What is your biggest takeaway from this question? First of all, from a logic standpoint, did any other answer choice even come close to the right logic? Did any answer choice come close other than choice A? No. It's not that, hey, if there were no choice, you could have chosen any other answer choice. No, that does not work. Right? In a CR question as well as in an RC question, you're not choosing the best answer. And I hate when experts say that, hey, you're going to choose the best answer. No. There's only going to be one answer that's going to be correct. Every other answer choice would be absolutely incorrect. And if the GMAT wanted to replace the correct answer choice, they would replace it with another correct possibility, not one of the other options. Okay, that's really important. That's very, very important. Okay, let's talk about Shelby will refuse. This is a fairly simple argument compared to the prior one. Still, this is a 700 level argument. Okay. So what were we doing last year? We're going to take visualization to a slightly newer level this year. Why? Because this question. Why? Because this question has something interesting here. Okay. It has a certain way they've written, provided information that leads to visualization, a beautiful visualization. Okay, last year we did not recycle anything, and we actually sent everything for incineration. So how many trash cans do you see over here? Can you count the number? 10, right? So let's assume one truck is one trash can. So last year we sent 10 trucks for incineration or to be burned down, and this burning produced a lot of residual ash. Now this year, as per the argument, if we sent last year and if we collected the same amount of refuse, how many trash cans am I going to send for incineration? This year I'm going to send 5 trash cans, right? If I collect the same amount of refuse. Now my question to you is, if instead of collecting the same amount of refuse, and I want you to read the argument and then answer this question, if I collect the same amount of refuse, if I collect not the same amount, but 10 times as much refuse, if I collect 10x as much refuse, not the same amount, but this actually starts to become really, really big, then how many trash cans or trucks will I be sending for incineration? If I collect 10 times as much garbage as I did last year, how many trucks do you think, as per the argument, I'm going to send? I want 25 people to respond to this one. I have 10 responses. I have 15 responses. I need 10 more. 25 people. 16, 17, 20. Okay, 23. All right. I think I'm just one short. All right. I think we have this. I'm going to end my poll and broadcast the results. And this is the beauty of language. Only 6 of you got this right. The correct answer is 5 and not 50. And let's kind of see why it's 5. And this is where understanding the argument comes in. Let's read the last statement here. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. What they're really saying is that regardless of how much refuse we collect, we're going to only send half as many trucks as we sent last year. That's it. Even if you collect 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, that's information that's given to you. Can you see that? That regardless of the amount of refuse, yes, it is about the number of trucks, yes. Not the amount of refuse that you collect. Why? Because you're going to get half as many trucks. And that's important. That's visualization. That's where the key to answering every CR question is in the argument, not in the answer choices. Let me just delete this. Let's get the marker once again. This year, city services will separate for enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to half of last year's number. So what is it that we are really saying? We are saying doesn't matter how much refuse I collect. If I sent 10 trucks last year, then this year I'm only going to send 5. The quantity of refuse as a material. Okay, that's important. Now let's go through this over here. The conclusion is that this year I'm going to generate half the ash that I generated last year. Why? Because I'm going to only get half as many trucks for incineration this year. Okay, so we ask the same falsification question. In what scenario will the ash generated be greater than 50% if I only send half as many trucks? Okay. The only possible scenario is if you stuff those trucks so much that each truckload generates a lot more ash than did a truckload last year. That's the only scenario. There's no other possibility. Very, very similar to highway miles question, where the only scenario was that the total distance goes down. You can really see how the logic starts to repeat if you visualize this. Okay. The only assumption is ash per truckload needs to be similar to or lower than what it was last year. Okay. Is that clear? Can it be said that each quantity of truck may or may not carry the same quantity of refuse this year? That's a great point, Anuj. Can you say that? The answer is no, but the very fact that you're asking this is a great point. Why? Because different amount of refuse for the same pound by pound may generate different amount of quantity of ash. So that's why the answer is ash per truckload, not the quantity of refuse. Okay, but great question, Anuj. I like how that you're thinking about this. Okay. Let's go through the answer choices. I'm going to show how you guys polled here. You guys, I think 40% of you answered this correctly, which again, still makes it a 700 level question. 38% answered this correctly. And you guys can really see how when you don't focus on the logic of the argument, you falter. Choice A says, no material that you separate for recycling will be incinerated. You can infer this from the argument. This is a classical case where, hey, this is a must be true, but the fact really is it doesn't provide any new information, and hence this is not an assumption. You can infer this from the argument overall. Choice B talks about cost. We don't really care about cost here. Our goal is to reduce the amount of refuse. Choice C compares the proportion last year versus this year. First of all, we don't know what was the proportion last year. So any comparison greater versus less doesn't do anything to further our conclusion. Number two, again, if I'm only going to get half as many truckloads, does this even matter? If I'm only going to get half as many truckloads? No, it doesn't matter, right? And that's kind of that's the beauty of focusing on the argument. You can reject answer choices with so much more confidence. Once you really have that takeaway from the argument that I'm only going to get half as many truckloads, then you're not even going to look at this answer choice. Okay. Ash per truckload is over here. The refuse incinerated this year will generate no more ash per truckload incinerated than did the refuse incinerated last year. And again, it compares the ash per truckload, which is the right criteria as per our pre-thinking. The negated statement is the refuse incinerated will generate more ash per truckload. If that happens, my conclusion breaks down. Okay. Can you see how this is the correct answer? And can you also see how with negation test it breaks the conclusion? A few more yeses, guys. What's going on? What happened with the energy level? Okay. Choice E, very popular incorrect choice. Proportion of recyclable total quantity of refuse. Do we care about the total quantity of refuse? No, we don't. Why? Because we'll only get half as many truckloads. We don't care about the total quantity of refuse. If we even negate, say total quantity of refuse was greater than what it was last year, does it matter to me generating ash? No, because I'm getting half as many truckloads. Okay. Now, any additional takeaway for you post this question? What have you learned about acing critical reasoning? Or let's just talk about acing the assumption portion of critical reasoning, because once you do assumption, everything else starts to fall in line. So what have you learned about the assumption part of critical reasoning? Don't read the answer choices before pre-thinking. They will mess you up. Okay. Pre-thinking, find the conclusion. All right. Focus on the conclusion. Think like an economist? No, I wouldn't say that. I would just say don't bring outside information, but visualize, Read the argument. The key is in the argument. Okay. The key is in the argument, not in the answer choices. Once you focus on the argument, you will find life becomes a lot easier. Okay. So this is not rocket science to be told. I mean, most things in the world are not rocket science. Only rocket science is rocket science. And again, if you use pre-thinking, if you focus on learning how to visualize, learning how to build that argument structure, and then doing pre-thinking, you're going to find that, hey, you're not only able to solve more questions correctly, but you're also more efficient because you're rejecting the answer choices. Your brain's not doing back and forth between the argument and the answer choices or so. And which will make you efficient not only in that particular question, but also as across questions. Why? Because there'll be less friction in your brain. Okay. So to achieve 90th percentile, make sure you learn how to classify statements. Make sure that you learn how to understand and visualize the conclusion. Why? Because if you don't know these, they are both reasons why you would make a mistake. Then figure out how to build that logical structure. And which means you link the conclusion and figure out how is it that the author's arriving at the conclusion. How is the author justifying that conclusion? You have to answer that question. If you can't answer that question, there's no point reading the argument itself. And again, and that's kind of where in practice, you have to get into the habit of answering this question. How the hell is the author justifying the conclusion? Once you learn to do this consistently, questions would become easy, because the only reason why you would make a mistake then is because you didn't understand the answer choice. But by the way, if you did not do this, or if you did not do this, and if you came to this point, which is selecting among the answer choices, and if you try and figure it out, you'll have no idea if you made a mistake because you didn't understand the answer choice, or because you didn't understand the conclusion, or because you didn't do argument and pre-thinking. So that's why learning this in an order is very, very important. Okay, because each one of these areas is a faltering point. And if you learn them in an order, that's very, very important. That actually helps you get to that 90th percentile. Okay. So how do you do this? Your goal, and even when you do this, you're not going to get everything right. This is an example of someone who scored 95th percentile on critical reasoning, and for him, in hard questions, not in medium, but in hard questions, his accuracy was still 65 percentile, 65% in the last 20 questions. This is a 3D chart out of Scholarinium. However, in medium questions, his accuracy was 90%. Okay, so go with an attitude to get every question right, but you will make mistakes, and as long as you get to the point where you're getting 65 to 67% to 70% of hard questions right, you're almost at that 95th, 97th percentile or so. Okay, because people like us exist to make you falter so that you do well on the test. So we will try and mess your brain up. It's your job to tell yourself that, hey, when in those questions where your brain gets messed up, those are opportunities to learn and not an opportunity to give up. Okay, that's very important. I'm going to tell you, this is the threshold that you have to reach. So how do you go about doing this? Start with a premise and conclusion module if you're an e-GMAT student. Look at, this is what a 90th, the data here comes from a 90th percentile student or so, and you can see the amount of time this person has spent just on learning the fundamentals. Okay, that's almost 2 hours or so. Okay, then learn how to visualize the conclusion. These are some of the areas which are there in your these are files which are there in your free trial. Go through them. Prethinking two entities, we actually solved questions about two entities and logical gap in this. So go solve these questions, go sit through these lessons, and you will learn how to do this. Okay. If you are a paid student, you will go through every possible argument structure that the test will throw at you in the context of first assumption, then evaluate, then strengthen, then weaken or so. Just through these 10 files, you're looking at about 100 arguments here.
Okay, and that's the breadth just in assumptions, because we want you to master visualization. We want you to, whether it's at the conclusion level or at the answer choice level. Really important. Okay, don't time yourself at this point. Push for high accuracies. And you can see as you go through this, all four aspects, whether it's fundamentals, conclusions, argument and pre-thinking, and understanding the answer choices, will get tested and will get evaluated. And you'll get personalized feedback on that. Okay. Here's a guy who initially thought he was really smart in critical reasoning. This guy was a physicist, and he's now studying at INSEAD, if memory serves me right. And for him, CR was supposedly should not have been an issue, but it was an issue. Why? Because of this quote over here. Language has a way of manipulating your mind, and GMAT's really good at doing that because it'll make you think you got the right answer. But just spending those 10 to 15 seconds to think about what the author is talking about, doing that pre-thinking, will help you reject the incorrect answer choices. Okay. So start your pre-thinking journey, and then if you're an e-GMAT student, stay focused. You'll be able to master this in 14 days or so. All right, with that, feedback on the webinar. I'm going to take some questions which were there. You can put your question in the Q&A pod. There was a question which was there, which is feedback on the webinar and the short answer pod, guys, really important. And let me share the files. Here's the session handout. And there's a question that someone asked. It's like, which exam format's preferable, the online or the in-center? There isn't a preference. I think the question question depends on what you're more comfortable with. For example, I really love the desk that I work on. I'm a very what's the right word to say? I'm someone who likes to work in a certain environment. Environment's really important to me. So given a choice, I would take the test in my house and not in the center. I know there are other people for whom the house doesn't provide a conducive enough environment, who do not have a reliable enough internet connection, and they prefer to take the test in the center. So it's completely up to you. Okay. If you do choose to take the exam in center, one thing that I will tell you, we actually have a couple of best practices videos on our YouTube channel, but we also have basically one advice that I will tell you is that make sure that you get an Ethernet cable connecting, which connects to your PC. That's one thing that's very, very important. Is there a difference in difficulty in the level of questions? Absolutely not. No, Riddhi, there's no difference. Okay. All right. There's another question that someone asked. I said, hey, if I have a 630 on the GMAT, do I have to go through the entire course, and how long will it take? So if you have a 630, it depends on the score breakup. So if, for example, you have a Q49 and essentially a V30, then clearly you don't need to go through the entire quant course. And once you take a Sigma X mark, you will be able to figure out where your abilities are and personalize your learning. The second thing which is there is a quant course is designed so that if you have high ability, every course has multiple diagnostics, and it will tell you if you do well on the diagnostic that you don't need to do certain portions of the course. So even people who start with a Q49, they get a personalized course, and they only learn portions that they need to learn. Okay. Anirudh says, this is my first GMAT. Any tips? Anirudh, just make sure you don't do anything special for the test. Approach the GMAT the way you approach your practice tests, and be consistent. Don't learn 10 new things or any new thing a week before the test. That's what I really say. Dhananjay says, To score a 720, what proportion of questions can be hard? Remember, 720, you're looking at what, 92, 93 percentile. Depends on the breakup. So let's say if you say I'm going to get a 720 with a Q48 and a V40. Now V40 is 91st percentile, which means that most likely on the verbal side, about 60 to 65% of questions will be hard. Okay. A Q48 could depend on the breakup of arithmetic and algebra geometry. If on the arithmetic side, let's say you are at a Q50, and in the algebra geometry, you are at a Q46, then I would say about 70 to 75% of arithmetic questions are going to be hard. Okay. So it depends on that. What constitutes at 720, Dhananjay? The other piece someone asked sometime earlier was, hey, does the difficulty level of questions that I get in CR, does that difficulty level depend on how I do in SC or RC? And the answer to that is no. Each subsection, both on quant and verbal side, is independent. So that's something that that you guys can focus on. There's another question that came in. If you have a 710, does it make sense to retake? Very simple answer over here is if you have a 710, if you're aiming for a US business school, then definitely retake. Why? Because for international students, who get a 740, not only do you have a 3 to 4x as high a probability of admission, and we've done research on it. If you go to our admits and scholarships page on our main website, you can see stats over there. So 710 to 740, your chances of admission would go up by about 3x or so. With a 710, you're probably looking at a 7% chance of admission. With a 740, you're looking at about a 30 odd percent chance of admission. Not only that, once you get an admission, that 740 is worth at a T2, T20 school, $30,000 to $40,000 in scholarship based on the statistical data that we have. In fact, the delta between a 740 and a 760 when it comes to admissions, when it comes to scholarships, scholarship data delta is about $40,000 in an M7 school. Okay. By the way, how many of you over here, just as a category, are aiming for Indian versus US versus European B schools? If you want to just type that out, that'd be wonderful, just to get some data. SC says, I have 1.5 months before you take the test. How long does it take to cover the entire verbal section? So depends what your starting point is. So if you want a high level answer, the answer is between 90 to 142 hours of effort. Depends, where would you fall, and would depend on your starting abilities. Now, if you're really good in one subsection, so if you go to our homepage and if you look at, for example, if you scroll down, look at Rafaela's video, you're going to find Rafaela was really good in, if I remember, SC and CR, and so she only needed the e-GMAT course for RC. So for her, that answer was 50 hours or so. Okay, so again, the answer depends on your starting abilities. Can you take it in 1.5 months? Yeah, 50 hours or even 120 hours in 1.5 months is very much possible. Okay. Lots of people going to Europe. Why Europe over US? Why Europe over US? Cheaper. Okay, in what ways? Want to work there, that's a very good reason. Want to work there. 1 year MBA, that's a good reason too. Well, US has some 1 year programs too. Cornell has them. Kellogg has a 1 year MBA program. That's pretty good. I think Columbia has a couple of 1 year MBA programs too. Okay. So why Europe other than, wanting to live there? Post-study visa regulations are better. In what way? In what way are post-study visa regulations better in Europe? And I hear this. Your wife can work. Yes, that's true. But in terms of just the employment visa, I think US is, given the fact that you can now have 3 years of OPT, is way better than most places in Europe. Again, Canada, completely different class. But when you compare US and the US and Europe, US gets you 3 years of OPT, which I think is there. Social state closer to home, yes, I can't argue with that. Yes, I mean Europe, it's a 6 hour flight back to India, or I think a 9 hour flight back to Singapore or Southeast Asia. Yes. Do US schools require more work ex? No, I mean it's between 3 and 8 to 9 years or so. Europe adds adds slightly more, so it starts more around 4. And Europeans in general are older candidates who go to European B schools. So yes, they'll take in a few more older candidates or so. But even in US B schools, you have folks who are 47, 48 years old doing their MBA. So it's not that USB schools don't take in older candidates. So, all right, this has been great. I want to thank you guys for help being a part of this webinar. It was a pleasure hosting you. Thank you for your enthusiastic participation. Do try the do attempt the free trial, and if you have questions, you can always write to me at rajat@e-GMAT.com. Okay. With that, as I always say, happy learning.